Hello everyone, today we address a topic that I should have addressed a long time ago. It might have gone as early as I began the Funkriege series, and however I think that at least some of you are now better acquainted to the broader topic and the contents of the work to understand the reason proper why I'm addressing this with actual example of fact checkable evidence from the same Funkriege that we naturally discuss about every single video we make, and you will forgive me now if these days I am digressing so much, making this bit more philosophical videos if you want. Really, I'm taking not a rest properly. I have videos to prepare soon. I will come back to the historical content. So some of you responded positively, said I like more this Historain playlist videos than some others. I think at least they are the best. Yeah, I'm glad about that, but I know that you're mostly here for history, sometimes not for my rambles, at least something that goes too much straight from that. But this topic is really important, and I hope this video will also pave the road to many other important acknowledgements we'll have to make in the future about more properly military themed military theory, we could say better. And I thought this topic to be fitting also for the current times. I mean, we are in the second winter of pandemic, at least in the second year that surely we would all make without all these problems. And it's a I realize this puts strains on many people at different levels. I'm always here making videos. I got affected by it directly, by the pandemic, indirectly as well. So something important has changed in my life connected to this, not even just negative, but let's say that there have been some, especially in the last months, let's say, a bit of emotional distress that made me reconsider more deeply the already acknowledged greatness of the Clausewitzian series, because some of you may come here and say, well, why is this guy talking about von Clausewitz? I mean, what do I care specifically? I bet some of you are not properly interested in military history either, right? This channel mostly tends toward that direction, and it's also unorthodox, at least in terms of topic choices. That is, sometimes we come to cover broader issues that, believe me, I do also for just for the sake of complexion, because it depended on me. I just talk about tactics. That is the thing that I'm mostly versed in. Not that it's necessarily most difficult to understand, but it's obvious that there would be much to discuss in properly strategical terms that instead are much more complex. And I think the internet even here provides a relatively few amount of information, at least looking at its broader complexity and difficulty of understanding in the first place, because you can easily make videos with, actually not easily, but make animated maps, change and so on. But understanding deeper strategical problems is something that takes a long time, but a very long one, right? And as we were saying last time, sometimes even a lifetime of dedicated study, and this is something that is objectively difficult to do, right? Even just for these entertainmental sake, that on Schwerpunkt always say this is not an entertainment channel properly meant. It's supposed to be saying something that makes the difference. And in these sad but hopeful times, I think that of course, things could have gone much worse, but I won't make philosophy about that because it would sound relativistic. I would like to point out properly I wouldn't say on the base of my personal experience, because obviously I got through the thing with the Funkriege in my life. That is to say, I properly have acquired, like my life changed. This is what I would like to first of all put forward in this video, that there is a real difference that this work made for me, the broader Clausewitzian thought, because of course von Clausewitz didn't write just this. He actually wrote an astonishing amount of stuff that would be interesting to cover on Schwerpunkt at some point, were we to finish the Funkriege. We are it's almost 2 years I make videos on that. We're right basically at the just one half of the work. And the practical effects that the Clausewitzian theory makes for good, positively for people. Because when we talk about warfare, of course, as we were saying before, not necessarily everybody's interested. They may say, this is kind of militaristic. I don't understand this clearly, or at least I've never been properly, interested in it. Even if it sounds interesting and fascinating, because I don't know. I don't know how many people actually do not consider war fascinating. I know many people that kind of distance themselves from it, even at an emotional level. They want to cope with it as if it wasn't there, they had nothing to do with it, but already by itself that reveals there is something at least that is worth addressing, and that at least that importance is recognized. So of course, I'm not an expert on von Clausewitz myself. As you know, I have a pretty different educational background. I've never worked with von Clausewitz specifically. I can translate it from the original. I've read important stuff about it, but mostly what I know about him derives from what I've done here on Schwerpunkt, where I've uploaded, I think, 150 videos about the topic of reading and commenting the work. And therefore, most of the acknowledgements, the acquisitions I've had in this work come through that. And they came through this period in my life that, in spite of the appearances, at least what I gave to Schwerpunkt, has been dense of important events for me, even if sometimes, sometimes detachedly, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively, indirectly indeed, but surely something that made me reconsider at a certain point of my life things that I thought I had, not that I had necessarily settled, but that they wouldn't come across anymore. Right? When we talk about emotional strains, and especially what that is effectively, the greatest form of suffering we come across, of pain we come across, let's say better, because there is a difference between pain and suffering, indeed. The von Krieger sometimes has given me an incredible insight on how to cope with the situation. I see that many people are hungry for these kind of contents. Like many people like motivational speeches or broader philosophical takes. I don't know. Now half of you will hate me, but I've been following, for example, for some times Jordan Peterson's videos that I must say that, yeah, they might have had some influence in my life. I acquired them. I respect the man. What he says. I haven't gone crazy for it, but I definitely agree in good part with what he says. But at the same time, when I realized what the von Krieger brings on the fore, and considering that, of course, Jordan Peterson, I don't know how much versed he is in von Clausewitz or what the broader implications of its thought actually are. It probably could have expanded to certain issues that I didn't think really work in that perspective, because it's very easy to come out here and have an opinion, write it loud. There are many people who have legitimately something to say, speaking their minds for a positive aim, and there is, especially at the core, the center of these broader movements, the sense of lack of purpose, right? That is indeed probably the single most important problem in this picture, because it gets down really to that. This is a great compliment to idealism, at least the Clausewitzian background, we could say. The emphasis put on the concept of moral forces, the fact that at the end of the day we are out there with our mind coping with a world that definitely has other dynamics that we have to fundamentally cope with, and that we are already, however, predisposed to cope with, and such broader realizations that really belong, aside from von Clausewitz, to simply the philosophical thought of the time. There are beautiful passages from a big deal, even if you read Anderson or I don't know if you ever studied Fichte, Hegel. I love Kant specifically. It's not a surprise that I like von Clausewitz so much for that reason. And I'm also a rational person, broadly speaking. I like rationalism. At least when I studied philosophy, I had some preferences. I liked Descartes. So since the beginning, I have this conviction that the human mind should have a positive take on reality. That is to say, this doesn't even matter in terms of whether it works or not, but that's exactly the point, right? That as far as we are concerned individually, whatever this experience is meant to signify existentially, there is surely a mindset that can make the actual practical difference, right, in reality, as far as we know it, telling the truth. And the Filmkriege is consistently not just a work for military minds. As we often explained, it is specifically a work on war. It doesn't digress, right? Von Clausewitz is not just of extraordinary intelligence there, but he makes you understand that his sole scope is exclusively military, right? There is no other digression. In fact, this is why it's often misunderstood, because people start thinking, but then therefore he's a militarist. He believes that everything should be solved through war, right? All these stupid ideologies that fundamentally have crippled also the spread through the masses of the Clausewitzian theory that has absolutely nothing to do with militarism. If you have ever, even just started reading the Filmkriege, which should be studied hopefully in the original language and also metabolized over time, because it's really a big thing, right? It's a huge work. But in its, as we've seen, even dialectically, it's simple to understand, right? The difficulty, all it derives from the fact that it's very complex in structure, right? But dialectically speaking, if you read that, there is a very few stuff you will not understand. You have, of course, to watch out the semantics, the proper meaning, and so on, the broader, the connections, everything is chained there. So that's where also just if it was just the pure intellective talent of this man, that is the demonstration of it. But it goes far beyond, because it's not just a rational take on reality through an astonishing set of skills, because von Clausewitz was very well educated. He was a polymath. He studied philosophy as much as physics. That also can overlap, of course. He has a broader understanding of the scientific world, physics, chemistry, but he also is very practical. He has a beautiful prose. He has definitely literary interests, and he's able to deliver his content with a dramatic effectiveness, which speak definitely for what we were addressing also the other day about the fact that there's no person who can't claim to be intelligent if it has exclusively just a scientific or humanistic, respectively, education, and doesn't mix the two. In my modest opinion, but I think that is pretty evident. In Insight, von Clausewitz gives us a picture of the world, right? Through war, he describes the world as we know it through, of course, a human lens, because if you have understood it at this point, von Clausewitz is starting from this dramatic realization that our positive, rational, scientific understanding of reality is constantly limited by a degree that would discourage basically anyone to do anything, right? And this goes against modernism in as much it think about the 19th century would become the one of positivism, and the idea that after all everything can be truly understood, right? If you know Kantian philosophy, there is a very sharp divide between the two things. There is a core knowledge, the noumenous, that can't fundamentally be known, and then however there is an interaction with these cores that obviously manifest themselves through our senses, through our intellect, in ways that we have that surely hide the truth of that core, but are fundamentally just the only thing we can see. And within this capacity of interaction with the world, there is an infinite potential for human action that, even though it's limited, is, however, can bring us where we couldn't even dream of, and that fundamentally we will never reach, just because fundamentally we're limited just as beings, and there is obviously an end to that, and that's a sad realization. It's also fascinating how all this doesn't overlap with religion, that, however, we don't have to think was out of the scope of this war, right? Von Clausewitz doesn't talk about that, doesn't talk about his personal opinions, he doesn't talk about politics, he doesn't talk about his broader national, what the historical context that brought to the creation of the Funkriege was very peculiar, were very specific, it stemmed from the defeat and the annihilation, I would say, and the resurgence of Prussia during Napoleonic Wars, the impact had by with the French revolutionary and eventually Napoleonic military model, and how this had impacted the warfare of the time. And you can understand that behind the work, there is a man that had a great set of passionate ideas. He was, if you study, his relation with Marie, would become his wife, what all that entailed. Literally, if you study his biography, you realize how a person that enlisted at 12 years old in 1792, so in the first war of coalition, and fought all the way through the Napoleonic Wars and died in the Polish uprisings in the 1830s. I mean, as a commander, he had and all the career in the Prussian stuff. He had also an important role at Waterloo, for example. I mean, he had definitely a hell of a lifetime devastated, right, by these mind-blowing events nobody had ever seen. I mean, Napoleonic Wars were by far the most devastating set of wars, the clashes that had ever been seen historically at that point, and that from which the Saint von Clausewitz stemmed. But I mean, a person that fought first-hand with a huge amount of responsibility as a commander, that had the capacity of having his own life, and even having the time of learning things that were not strictly military, but that were aimed at understanding better military, gives you the broader scope of this intellect, and that was all-encompassing, and that, German philosophy at that point was really making, the world a better place through, and that we still prepotently also derive a lot from that world that in Middle European terms. I mean, it's overlooked today. We don't. Many people are fascinated, with, for example, with Germany because of World War II and this kind of controversiality of it. But there is an entire civilization in Europe that stems from the broader surroundings in the previous centuries that is astonishing, and nobody gives a freaking damn about, right? And just for speaking about people that just are, impressed emotionally by war, but do not quite try to make sense or to look at the roots at the political and social processes, why certain things arrive there or not, right? And that's how, unfortunately, we still look at the past like. We could go on with that because, of course, von Clausewitz's life and also the reasons brought to the writing of the Funkriege are definitely, never ending in terms of as food for thought. But the point I wanted to get to is that the Funkriege illustrates essentially not just war, right? Through war, there is the realization of human existential problems, right? And how to cope with them, and how to solve them in part, right? The work always starts from this terrific realization I was saying before, that most of what you do in life is fundamentally doomed. I'm not speaking specifically of mortality, but in perspective, because that's where actually a spiritual dimension that is not discussed in the work would take over, because here, okay, we don't need to digress on that, but also religion has a function there that I would say is I hardly ever hear debated, even in religious or anti-religious debates. Frankly, that's also appalling. But the point there is that, of course, it's also probably looking at taking life as a whole as, first of all, that realization that is what you want to do with your life. I mean, you have this shot. Doesn't that motivate you in a sense? There's a lot of nihilism going on these times, and that starts not from the realization of doom, right? Because if you really realize that, if you really acknowledged how that is ever too late than you can ever imagine, the question would spur you in a way you won't believe, right? What people are today are fundamentally apathetic because of lack of actual understanding, lack of knowledge that takes a toll to acquire, and therefore there is nothing really special in idling there, not sheltering from the world because you fear to be hurt or to suffer, and then doing nothing until you die, right? And of course you can do that, maintaining a certain degree of stability, but is that what life is worth? I think there is more to that. And in terms of achievement, if you wonder why before I quoted, for example, Jordan Peterson, it's not because I want to to introduce you to that thing. I think many people know what he does, and there is a lot of let's say fanboyism and anti-fanboyism towards this or that figure. So, but that is at least in terms of his contents. Let's say there is a very, let's say, a point of view that can serve to address certain issues, right? Because von Clausewitz actually provides a much better, outspoken solution to most of these problems that seem now to be discussed by these figures as if they were great minds. But let me tell you, even just talking by an average scholar, that he can surely he's a fascinating, he's a charming person, he's a great communicator, no doubt. But I mean, there are way many more and better articulated thoughts you can come up with, and I'm not trying to do it now, but just in terms of practical difference, I can tell you the Funky can boost you way more. If you're looking for a moral booster, well, that's definitely something you should give a look to. So I would go as simply as that. Our problems out here is that life causes pain, unavoidably, right? Suffering is another thing, because suffering is poking in the wound, and sometimes we do that, and it's like sabotaging ourselves. And that's negative. I mean, it's fine to sometimes do it to boost further reaction, sometimes even to have this counterbalance that can happen during the day. I was talking about cyclotimic phases the other day. Well, yes, you can, let's say, feel very, very bad at some point to feel better immediately afterwards, but let's say that these swings are not particularly helpful, even just from a psychological point of view. But it's obvious that life brings enough pain, and we all know that, for us to not be able to avoid this pressure, and therefore our own inescapable commitment in trying to solve the problem, because it's that at the end of the day, like, nobody can take away pain from life, right? The realization that life can be just an easy experience, soften up, sterilized, I don't know how to say it better, but let's say epurated from all kind of negativity is a myth, right? And can happen just in those circumstances where you literally alienate yourself from the world to the point that you live with a very few, and you don't want to essentially take the next step, take a challenge or a bet or whatever. And we know that actually that's not much of that's not even realistic, in the sense that human mind is attracted by chaos, is attracted by the idea of putting order where things are not orderly at all, and that would seem irrational if it is indeed, and it is something written in our genes, essentially to go out there and accomplish something, not just for ourselves, to grow, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of our community. And it does take a toll, but it's also quite rewarding, because as we will see now, the more you take that challenge, and naturally with all the limits that a personal moral background can sustain, you will improve that, and you will even manage to expand the ladder so that you can eventually take on bigger challenges and solving ever greater problems. This is just naturally not a realistic picture because there is the the unwanted messed up thing that arrives in our lives, and we are basically washed away by, and we all know that, and that's fundamentally what we fear the most in life. So that it's this idea you can always do just better, and you, in order to avoid pain, simply as that, it's something obvious because that's what we're looking for, but it's abstract to pretend that we will not get into that. And until we do not address the pain problem, and we cannot solve even what we try to do positively, because there is no positivity there without that toll, without that loss, in a sense, that however is expected to be compensated with someone else for something else. And for not talking about, of course, when things simply have, when shit happens and you can't really do much about that. So a first attitude that of course it transpires through the Fundkriege is that, of course, there is not much you can hope for going well out there. Von Clausewitz is not a pessimistic, but he's simply very objective, and he's telling you that through war, for example, that we should introduce here as basically the most pressuring human situation in which humans can find themselves in, right? This is the point of the Fundkriege, why it takes on an existential meaning, because we are essentially, all historians try to sort out what happens in our world. War is a moment when you have to do it there for the sake of command or for reconstructing what happened later, and in any case it's the same process. It's both processes at the same time, and even though there are naturally more important dynamics than war in human history, these tend to pass by, sometimes even not clearly pictured, even though there may be enormous tsunamis right now, however, are so big that you perspectively not even realize them, and therefore you can't even effectively cope with that, or at least it's easier to adapt to them than actually making a fuss about them. Whereas war is something so atrociously concentrated and pressuring on the single communities that come across it, that not just carried it out but also suffered them independently, that indirectly, that you have to be the point of the Fundkriege is you have to be prepared to that, to cope with that. And that is definitely the moment, however, where you're put in front of the greatest challenges from a psychophysical point of view, and I think there is no need to explain that. I think this is self-evident what war requires in terms of strains to a human mind and body altogether, because we're not even specifically talking about the military here, we're talking about everybody involved. I don't want to make you specific historical examples. I must say that, for the first time in my life, during the memory day at the end of January, I read for the first time Anne Frank's diary. And just I was inspired, but I don't know why. I don't read much literature now because I really don't have the time. But it was fascinating. And it made me believe, just what World War II has been in a collective perspective, something that we have lived, that our families have told us about, that has concretely affected them. Like, I know that many people, it's not banal to stress these topics because many people, especially I think the younger, I don't think properly realize this point, that war is not something lost in somewhere in some distant time or space, that in our world, fortunately, we do not have to cope like in the past, directly or indirectly, in spite of the resurgence of conflictuality in the world after some of the most peaceful times, especially after during the Cold War. Yet that, it sounds weird, but so it is, right? There were important wars, of course, during Cold War, as everybody knows, but also in recent times there's been fluidification of the blocks and has brought to that higher degree of conflictuality. And I'm just speaking in terms of ratio, number of people living in the world and the ones actually killed by war, right? Statistically speaking. So war should never be considered as a banal topic. It should never be felt as if it was the philosopher's opinion on it that makes the difference. Von Clausewitz was a general in the Prussian army during the Napoleonic era. So he was a person that saw raising through the ranks with all the difficulties that you came, making literally every kind of degree of pain and sufferance and tragedy and the most unspeakable and horrifying things that you can see there, and try to put yourself in his shoes for a moment, in his boots, let's say better, and try to think of what you would be. I made recently some videos about a psychologistic approach to war. I mean, even problems related to the war mindset that is in fact dramatically overlooked, and is on the contrary, I think, one, if not the most important of this, and that's why the phone critique is so meaningful in this regard. But try to think for a second and realize that if there is someone who saw bad things happening all around in his life and wouldn't know whether he would be alive the next morning or if he could ever get home to his loved ones, whatever, that was him. For an astonishing amount of time, he was an exile. He went fighting in Russia. I mean, there is all a drama behind the thing. He had his country occupied, right? So it's defeated in battle, in war, and occupied. So it's one of those moments, historically speaking, where he was also condemned to death, actually, by the same Prussian government under the French domination, because of course, of high treason, because he went fighting within the Tsarist army. Tolstoy even mentions von Clausewitz at some point in War and Peace. That's fascinating, and he doesn't. He actually mocks him, but that's funny to read, and because that's exactly a take that a more a simpler vision of reality, and a bit of a critical one that, without much sounding even, is actually in that passage he passes for the German that is lost in the philosophical theory that should match with practice, and if it doesn't do manual, it enters in crisis, right? A bit of the stereotype. Von Clausewitz was actually quite the opposite of it. That is not to say that actually German military culture didn't undergo that severe problem, misunderstanding von Clausewitz completely, and that's why the Germans lost 2 world wars, and quite badly, by the way, and with all the consequences of the case. But so we're talking about the scale, even. I mean, for example, if the Soviet Union existed, it's because of von Clausewitz, right? Indirectly, not that he would have liked much that happening, but, if Lenin hadn't been a Clausewitzian, he would have never won the Civil War. And that was the clarity of vision that we're trying to explain today that actually brought him to that. And that shouldn't be overlooked, because that's literally the history of the world having changed forever because of that. So you would say, where are we going with this? Well, the first thing that impressed me much in the Clausewitzian thought is, when it comes to issues of insecurity, of undecisiveness, these things that I think we all come across, right? Von Clausewitz comes up with a very important acknowledgement that is something you can easily test yourself in your life and for things that happen. The idea of believing in yourself, how important it is to believe in yourself, right? It sounds like a cheesy compliment, encouragement that I don't know, you can receive from your loved ones. But you believe in yourself. Don't be a bit of a romantic one. It's not romantic at all, right? Von Clausewitz is not flattering us. It's not, patting on our shoulders. I don't know. I might even disliked him if I hadn't met him personally, because I think we are very different. But he was a hell of a genius, and definitely he saw very lucidly and clearly. And frankly, I would prefer having let's say, a person like him giving me this advice as I do, than a friend just encouraging me without, however, explaining me why that is important, right? And this is something we have to get straight, right? It's not that what we think we believe actually, or the people that should always just be positive, let's say, towards choices we make, right? There is a point in life that entails discipline, and entails discipline at the highest levels, because discipline is aimed at correcting certain human behaviors that we are aware of. It's not an impositive measure dictated by bloodthirsty monsters who want to send people to die for no reason. There is a broader logic and intelligence that in the military is reflected quite openly by the fact that exactly because if you're risking your life at that moment, that's literally the the least moment in which you're thinking of something that doesn't work. And it's not surprising that also history of civilization passed prepotently through the one of warfare and of military structures, and some of the greatest civilizations we think of in their history were built, of course, on the ashes, on the corpses of millions, but still added something to, I don't know, think about the Roman Empire, right? The army was the most effective component of the Roman state, right? The rest would functioned sensibly worse, but this is true for other great ecumenic empires. And here we're also important, now that I mentioned that, speaking of ashes and corpses, it's not that we should be happy of that happening. And this is the explanation, the tip that I always give when approaching the Funkrieg. As we were saying before, von Clausewitz always talks about war. I mean, he's not focused on anything else. And hence, given his most famous quote, that war is the continuation of policy by other means, there have been certain quite unattempted, let's say the least, commentators that I've even met sometimes, that didn't even understand about the Funkrieg, that when von Clausewitz says things like, the good politician, speaking about the one that uses the military instrument for its own sake, he's and praising the employment of the properly the strategically educated employment of the military instrument. He's not praising the political reason that can stand behind the employment of that mean. That is to say, von Clausewitz would have not liked Hitler because he, managed to achieve some success with Poland or France in that level, and that also happened with a much less degree of determinism that is often believed, and because it succeeded, right? At that point he might have judged the objective connection that existed there between the fact that without Hitler the Wehrmacht would have not had even the political interest to do that, and that Hitler had it done, but hell, it was doing it for, eventually triggering a freaking, genocide in Europe, building a completely different world based on definitely debatable assumptions, to say the least. And von Clausewitz would never judge a political opinion. The Wolf von Kriege is not about that, and the fact that it's not about that, it's not because he's silent about, whatever the reason can be. The point is that he's silent because he doesn't give a damn, right? He's not there to evaluate political ideas. He's simply telling you how to use the military instrument, where you to use it, and whether you have good or bad ideas, that stays on you. And this is the sense of responsabilization that is very easy to equivocate and to get, to misunderstand, because believing in yourself doesn't mean... even I think the greatest criminals in history objectively do things most of the time because they believe in the righteousness of their actions. But the point here is deeper. It's a cognitive one, right? You should believe in yourself, von Clausewitz says, not because, the world should smile to you and we should all be happy about your accomplishments, even if you're a freaking sadist, an assassin or whatever, terrorist or whatever, but because he's explaining you how to mechanically achieve that, also in the case eventually whoever you are. That is, this is the beauty of the Funkrieg. As we were saying before, here there is no hint, not even a glimpse of it, of any subjective perspective. Right, the Funkrieg is written specifically to be read by everyone, to every single person to this world. Doesn't matter where you come from, what's your background, what's your idea. That is just meant to explain to you how war works and how you can make the best in case you were to employ the military instrument, right? And that is achieved by providing you with properly a military culture, a strategical education, strategical culture. Why believing in yourself? Well, believing in yourself, von Clausewitz says, is, first of all, von Clausewitz identifies intelligence, proper and moral resources. Things are a bit more complicated than this. There is a specific part of the first, I remember, I think it's the second book, when he addresses the various types of mindsets and of attitudes and mental characteristics of people, and he draws this sketch of essentially those moral qualities that bring you to be the good commander. I mean, the one that should fundamentally maintain truly believe in himself, right? In this moment of greater pressure you can ever imagine in war, where there is poor information, where you don't know what the hell is going on, where you're pressured by all the people who are freaking out, where you have to maintain, have to stay firm, you have to stand your ground, you have to be consistent about your choices. And von Clausewitz says something very important, that it doesn't matter that in war, like in life sometimes, most of the times actually, we lack constantly the wide majority of information that would be required to have approximately a good certainty about the successful outcome of our actions. We do not live in that world. That world, in other words, doesn't exist. War is the darkest of that situations, but life also in general is quite similar to that. You may actually just have more time to think, but since you're not pressured, and that's why I thought of you in this moment, we all have problems, strains put by this current global situation, and I think perhaps we understand better at this point what it means uncertainty, what it means, frustration, what it means sadness, what it means not knowing what we can do, and how bad that sounds. All it gets down to you. It gets down to the fact that you are confronted with a reality you have to deal with all by yourself. And this is, of course, provides you with a sense of responsibilization. It tells you, look, here, nobody else is in charge but you, because the pain you feel right now, and even the sufferance that you feel, depend, pain not on you, but you are the one who is experiencing it, and that has to cope with that, right? And therefore, it's useless fundamentally to look for, just for solutions that do not work. It's useless in part even to complain. It's useless to remain in the pit, let's say, even though it hurts to be like that. But you can't really make it better. You don't deserve to suffer. You deserve to regain control of the situation and to believe in a better outcome. And von Clausewitz comes to this point that believing in yourself is not just, and most importantly, definitely a matter of moral boosting, but it is a cognitive realization. Because von Clausewitz says, intelligence, the difference between intelligence and determination are fundamentally, rationality and determination, fundamentally most important moral forces. Determination is a particular type of courage that is essentially courage coupled with the capacity of taking action on the base of the information provided, rationally speaking, by your intellect, which is rare, because you may have a person that is dramatically intelligent that understands a lot, but doesn't have the guts to take action on the base of that, right? And simply being courageous has properly nothing to do with succeeding, because von Clausewitz says courage may even be the noblest of all spirits. This kind of, if you want, foolish, in fact, behavior that may be noble because it makes you sacrifices for others, but war is so complicated that courage, pure courage, aside from the fact that it can be found relatively easily in humans, it crashes without any further, precaution against the first problem that is always going to be presented there. That is to say, courage in warfare is literally one of the least important resources, in the sense you may have it, but fundamentally we know that the way an army works depends fundamentally on the commander capacities and the virtue of the army. That is how that army is motivated and capable to fight, and not just properly the courage of it. That surely is important for the individual, but in a collective sense it's just one of the various ingredients that are altogether much more complicated to make things work on the field and to actually achieve victory on the scale that is proper. And that's also what strategical education provides you with, that is, fuck the individual, right? And this is hard because von Clausewitz fuck the individual in the sense that, of course, in an army, right, there is some sacrifice to be done. Just like in life, that in order to get through certain things, you have to sacrifice others. Well, if that was equated on the scale of an army, that meant that for you, I don't know, paying $10 would make, on that scale, killing 200 people, right, of your own guys, but to achieve something that you have done. So in that sense, individuality gets down to that thing, and that's also all the various assumptions on which we base the concept that, of course, warfare expanded in civilization terms exactly on these acknowledgments, and that there is a reason why we don't fight as tribesmen, as warriors anymore, and we have states with citizen soldiers and a hell of a devastating power never been seen before, right? It's not technology, it's technology just serves to something much greater that is fundamentally based on a political and social ground, and that of which the military becomes instrument. But von Clausewitz feels dramatically for that, right? So what he does there, and that's why many people consider him, kind of crude in that sense, that they don't understand that behind that sacrifice, behind the realization that the proceedings of war are not humane, right, and that paradoxically the best way to make a war more humanitarian is to make it as immediate in terms also of delivery of violence as possible, so that it doesn't procrastinate itself and causes much more collateral damage along the way that was not even intended to, is actually seen as that's a negative way of, no, it's really saving people's lives, right? That is not understood today, whereas humans tendentially are lazy, are meant to stop, to even suspend the act of war gradually if not getting the thing done, and therefore creating complications that will throughout the conflict will break out into open warfare for sometimes years and years and years. And this is how effectively human societies work on average. But what von Clausewitz is saying is tending toward absolute war, that, having this greater clarity of vision, of focus, of understanding, of these moral resources needed to take action in that sense, and therefore solving the problem immediately, because that display of force would be enough to convince others to give up the fight without even losses, because with less than if a more procrastinating way of war, than actually in fact doing the same. And this is very important in someone's life, because it gives you that sense of taking decisions with your own responsibility, with your own full commitment, that should really make things arrive to a point. Now, this needs, of course, an astonishing amount of moral resources that are something that we build over time, that are not, growing, from a day to another, but that derive that can be, grown, cultivated, let's say, by having taking conscience, being aware that this is the mechanism. In other words, von Clausewitz says that when you have to take action, this can be in war as in life, and that's the point we're making here. You have naturally to plan this in a way. You have to carefully consider what you're doing on a rational base. It is to say, what are you doing this for? What's the scientific evidence that what you're doing has enough possibilities of success for you to fundamentally bet on them? Because never forget that this is a bet, right? There is never the certainty of victory. There is nothing like that. There is not that in war. There is not that in life. It's a card game. You know that by chance, someone is going to lose anyway. So there's always going to be the defeated. There's always going to be the winner. But life is also so complicated most of the times, as we'll see, there's going to be more losses than victories, which is depressing. You would say, well, yes, it is, but in our last series of 4 videos dedicated to victory, and we'll talk about that later, there is also the acknowledgement of the relative value of of an outcome, of an accomplishment, that defines the same concept of victory and defeat, because not necessarily all things that go straight or differently or wrong are necessarily to be seen as necessarily a defeat canonically meant. That obviously depends on what you have defined as an objective to accomplish, but it may open to you, and this is what von Clausewitz is saying, true failure, true pain, and this is something that philosophy of science by now is quite clearly acquired, that there is no real, the majority of scientific improvements do not derive from actual accomplishments. They derive from actual failures that teach others the hard way what works and what doesn't, specifically, so that you narrow down the base of things that may work on the base of experience, and expand your intelligence on that, your acquisition, on the base, however, of a failure. That is how the history of civilization was. If in the West we've believed otherwise, that is to say, everything ends happily, we would have to be on Mars by the year 2000, eating peels instead, and then dishes and so on. Well, that's the problem, right? People lack consistently a scientific education. In other words, they do not know what the hell you're talking about, and just hope that it will be the magnificent and progressive destiny of mankind, without even know that takes a freaking amount of sacrifice, of work, of hard work, of discipline, and it's victims, it's sacrifice. Something is gonna get lost, right? Peterson said something like, you never accomplish something without losing something else, and that is indeed something that a strategical education teaches you by default, and that is pretty well known to anybody who looks at at a campaign, a battlefield, says, was this worth? The answer should be given by those who have that control in the situation, and definitely at an individual level. And never forget that for von Clausewitz, war is nothing but a duel on a large scale. That is to say, life, of course, doesn't entail to always fight against someone else, but let's say it may be harder to fight against a broader picture than or even yourself at that point, that against someone else. And therefore makes you understand that you are still the one in charge. You're still the one in command. You're still the one that is responsible for yourself and who's going to pay for it, because it's as if you were the Clausewitzian triad in one, right? You are the politician who decides what needs to be taken, needs to be done with your life. You are the military that fights through it, but you're also the social background of it. That is, what are your resources, where you come from, what's your background, what are you willing to invest in that action. So this unity of intents is definitely what makes, in my opinion, the belief in yourself crucial. Because if you do not read there that fundamentally you're the only one who can provide an answer for yourself, you will never be able to accomplish anything. And von Clausewitz enlightens the way by saying something that apparently may sound reckless, but by experience, by statistic, it's really not. That is to say, once, and you've probably heard this somewhere else, and you may have agreed or disagreed, but just know that this is something that von Clausewitz came to realize through a thing like real war, that once you have undertaken an action, a decision, you're out there. Fundamentally, the operation has started after having planned it, and we know that, of course, no plan survives the first contact with the enemy. It is normal. It's a physical acknowledgement. It's not a matter of opinion. Von Clausewitz tells you, yes, you should be able naturally to fix what doesn't work along the way if you can, because also there are backup plans, there are solutions and so on. But when you are in the eye of the storm and you're going through this and you wonder, because you will wonder in life, what the hell am I doing? Am I doing this right? These are the actual existential questions. Are you certain of that? Why are you doing that for? Right? This is valid for everything. Can be for a job, for a relationship, for a big life choice that will surely take you somewhere else. Right? The question is, what you should ask yourself is, what are you doing that for? And at that point, if you have decided what you want, and knowing what you want in life, believe is not easy, right? There are people that do not have that clearly. I presume I've always known quite definitely what are the most important things I want in my life, and I can tell you that that helped me a big deal. You have to go on with that. Yes, von Clausewitz says never look back. Once you are in that, it's useless to withdraw. You may have made the worst plan ever. This is the paradox, but at that point for you, it's better to stick to it and to go through, because the ways you are going to get to the point where you want to arrive, even if it won't actually happen, are many, and they will surely open other realities that you have no idea that could be there as well. This is a bit the end of a history illusion. And through that acknowledgement, through the expansion of the broadening of your horizons, of your boundaries, and that acknowledgement, you will be able to fix the situation along the way, maybe taking another direction, but still moving from the point you had arrived. If you withdraw, if you retreat, if you go back, if you wish to go back the point you were before, first of all, know that you will not be able to do it, because that point is lost, it's gone, it's past. You're not the same person. You acknowledge that you have to cope with the situation now. You have to take your own responsibility as a man, and you don't quit, right? And even if you fail badly, right, and in life you may fail badly at so many levels, and there are certain things that are unspeakable, right, in terms of all the various negative things that can happen in someone's life. But let's say that compared to war, where you can easily be killed if you get the thing that, well, let's say that life on average at least presents you with problems that give you the opportunity to go on that way, and therefore to get through the impasse and hopefully reaching a better better shore. You would say, but it's hard. Yes, because von Clausewitz is perfectly aware of that. The eye of the storm is definitely, well, in actual fact, it's not the darkest place because you see the sky there, but I mean, the eye of the storm in terms of the actual, when you're in the pit, when you feel that you can't make it, you're freaking out, that you're nearing the breaking point in a sense, you want to give up, you don't believe in yourself, you're sad, you're in pain. Right, it hurts. This can be in and this is mostly an emotional problem. Right, let's be honest. Our problems, most of our problems in our lives, fortunately or unfortunately, derive from our emotional reaction to things. Right, it's what are our deep sensations and how these affect us. Von Clausewitz says, always remember that if that's the worst that can happen to you, first of all, you're going to get past it. Right, it is to say, in the darkest moment, you are fundamentally about to abandon that. You're going to find a solution. You're going to react in some way. Certain people break, indeed, and certain do not recover anymore. So I'm not saying that in life, everything can be solved. But von Clausewitz doesn't tell you that either. It just tells you this is reality. Right, you can. In that moment, keep sabotaging yourself, saying, "Oh my God, I won't make it." Becoming anxious and puzzled and paralyzed by the problem, by the difficulty, and so on. Or you can say, "Okay, I acknowledge that I'm suffering my pain now, but that this thing will be soon over. That is, after all, just a temporary emotional state. That even if things will go worse, that there's still, most of the times room for improvement, and that I won't feel like that anymore." And it's an illusion, right? That's a beautiful thing of it, because while pain comes simply, maybe still through your mistaken actions, and you don't have to be proud of that, definitely, because you failed, evidently, and it's hard to fail. Still, suffering, as we were saying before, is self-inflicted, and at that point, being in the worst of situations, it doesn't help you at all. And we all know that at the end of the day, when we feel down, we kind of like to linger a bit on that. We like to even push us, through that thing, to stick the tip of the spear a bit more into the wound, because we feel somewhat that what is going on, and that gives you clarity. That gives you definitely a better sense of reality. That is, yes, you acknowledge better what that is, but there is a moment in which you say, okay, this is just gratuitous. I'm just harming myself without valid reason. I can do better. There is a pain that I have to accept, but there is a suffering that I do not deserve. And what I need to do now that I understood the lesson, because if you got in that situation, it's because you made a mistake, like you mismanaged, you misplanned something, right? That is the interesting cognitive point, because you see, it's not just having done something wrong because not because you're a bad person, but because you have failed to understand reality, which is actually the most common problem that all humans have. We're genetically built to cope with the misunderstanding of reality. All our existential and historical experience is based on this, is based on the fact that we wished to do something, but nothing quite got the way we believed it would, cent for cent. This is, as Ben was saying, you're listening to this, I don't know, we're sitting on a couch, go to the kitchen if you're thirsty and, fill a glass with water and drink it. Try to picture in your mind before you do that, and then eventually see what happens in between, like how you envision it and how eventually that went astray, because maybe you got up and thought about something else. You have another need, or there's another thought that comes across. You get there, but you thought to find the glass somewhere, instead was in another place. That's how things are messed up, and you can imagine on a scale like the one of war, or a broader, even just from an individual point of view, an existential scale, like what happens in all your life. Think about all the things that go astray. Think about, even, it's depressing, all the things you lost economically, in terms of energies, of resources, for doing things that you thought you would accomplish in a way that instead didn't go the way. But just think that it's exactly through that failure that you acquired a better understanding of reality, better skills to cope with it, and at the end of the day, you have improved yourself. That's why people age, mature, and on average become more intelligent or wiser, because they have a better understanding, essentially, of what has already happened to them in part, right? And of course, we keep failing over and over again. Complex realities are never fully understood, but let's say, given the scale of an individual's horizons, that is exactly, you are also the one who measures that. Right, you're the one who decides to reach from A to B, or to C, or to D, and where to stop. Right, so you are the one who was putting himself in that situation, and that is taking responsibility for it. So a good advice in life would be, yes, it costs to broaden your horizons, to enlarge your ambitions, to decide to get something greater. But at the same time, that is tendentially the best way of living. To have accomplished something, to have done something, to have at least tried. So it is really true that participating is somewhat more important than winning. Like, nobody likes losing, and of course the Funkriege is designed to say, okay, I show you what you have to do to tendentially win. I mean, you have to want victory, and we will see how important that is. But fundamentally, even if you fail, which is likely to happen, it's that the acknowledgement you derive from that is still better, right, in insight, in perspective, that if you had remained sitting ducks doing nothing, or even withdrawing and say, okay, I tried this, oh no, wait, I was wrong, and go back, right? That even may give you actually some better insight of what you thought before, but still getting through the process is better than doing nothing. Definitely, that is crucial, right? The moral resources that are required to cope with this process. We don't all have them. There are things that really flatten us, that throw us on the ground in the darkest pit, and there are moments in which you really would like to give up, right? There are moments in which the pain is so great, the melancholy, the sufferance, the remorse, the regret, whatever the reasons have been that have brought you to that point, can bring you down in a really miserable state. And it's human. It's real as much as it is connected with exactly what you are as a person in this world, because without that we wouldn't exist even. We are built like that, right? There is a deeper acknowledgement of all this that you can look at, basically all words, philosophies, religions. That is, we all have to cope with pain at a certain point, and we all come up with an important acknowledgement. And I would say the most developed um, theories like Scotland like this come up with this great realization that is, um, even the idea of God is fundamentally the one of the acknowledgement, the fact that we are living this amazing experience we do not know the cause of, and that we identify in the divinity, and the fulfillment of that fate, let's say, because it's really a matter of fate in yourself as much as you have in this broader reality, is to be fully acceptive of what is happening in your world. In other words, keeping to complain why things happen to you, why as natural as it can seem, it's actually explainable. It's, let's say, self-inflicted, right? Wondering why things happen, won't or complaining actually why things happen won't make things better. Trying to understand them and accepting that they just exist is an important step. It won't stop from making you from making you feel pain proper, but at the same time, it will give you the realization that it's just that, right? And even if it hurts, that it's either something you can change, but it's always something you can change, because it's not even fully. Many people, that's a philosophy I don't like at all. Von Clausewitz would have probably agreed with me wholeheartedly. You don't, it's an idiocy to find a problem you can't cope with and pretending it doesn't exist, or, just changing perspective on it as if, it wasn't a problem, right? Changing perspective here maybe is the key, because of course, the more you know, the more you can change that perspective. But that doesn't come by ignoring the problem and pretending that is, from another point of view, it's just, after all, doesn't matter. That comes only if it is in conjunction with other things, and in reality, indeed, real things, in reality, indeed, you can go past certain problems that maybe at some point seem to you certain big deals, and then eventually say, okay, well, it wasn't that difficult to pass because I learned new stuff. I, stopped to feel, in a certain way. So you kind of grew up, right? And that thing probably to you doesn't seem scary anymore. So that was a problem maybe you didn't fully solve, and that maybe at some point you will be able to come to terms with. And I would say a good a self-psychoanalysis, thinking about your past, especially your childhood, important moments in your life, is crucial, right? Looking at your parents, where you were raised by, is where you're going to find most of the answers for what you are and what the better person you can be. And sometimes, believe me, it takes just having taken that step. It doesn't matter how hard it is, right? How, let's say, we may have been hurt by something. The best thing is to address the problem, is to stop pretending that is not the case. Is talking about that with someone we care about. It's really maybe doing it for that person. Is really meeting for the first time in your life somebody that makes you feel like you've never felt, and realizing that you can really be a better person if you are only one, because you do not deserve to keep suffering by yourself when you realize that you're actually the perpetrator of that you are the one who is constantly sabotaging yourself, and that seems just the way you have suited, you have settled with, just because you hadn't the courage to hope for you to be a better person. Well, this takes a lot of belief in yourself, and it does take a lot of faith, because coming back to the cognitive physical problem, if you want, when you have to do anything in your life, you go out there, you don't know how it's going to go, What do you think even the concept of religious faith stems from? Is exactly this, is realizing that doesn't matter how wrong things can go, you still have a responsibility, you still have a duty to fulfill to yourself primarily, and that empowers yourself at the point of providing you with new crucial resources to be really a better individual. So it's fascinating, that in Clausewitz and Trinity, the military, so the guys who actually make the fight, take the fight, take on the fight, because they are properly the ones, are in fact the ones who were attracted by gambling. That is to say, war, as we've seen, is the field in which things are going to go more straight from any other, right? So the politician and the average citizen, let's call it in this way, the average subject, will have other characteristics. The military, the one who really goes there to come to grips with the problem, is actually attracted, and the whole military is structured to cope with this aleatory nature of war. That is, at least of its outcome, right? It's really that same thing that we know as humans are excited by. I mean, the idea, how is it gonna go? I mean, even playing a video game can tell you that. A good video game about the military, even a good FPS, a simulator, something like that. You say, how is it gonna go? Isn't it the reason why you're going to play it over and over again, right? If it was always the same, you wouldn't like that. Instead, you like the amount of change, of possibilities, of things you can learn, right? And you can see how far can I go. That's exactly what pushes you, and that requires faith, because in life, that, as we've seen, that has a cost, right? You have to commit important resources. If you fail, you're gonna be hurt by that. But at the same time, it's literally every experience you make that presents you with that challenge. So you must have faith in yourself. You must believe in yourself, and this is excruciatingly important for anything you're ever gonna do in your life. If you don't take the courage to believe in yourself, if you don't have the vision of what you really want, right, that is quite important, right? It's not just having an abstract belief in yourself. This thing is really wanting something, right? You love that person, you're going to do everything for that person. Well, if you are sure of that, if you really believe that, even if it was momentary, even if that thing maybe one day won't be like that, but you want that now, you feel that is important, is compelling, your life is you're pushed by that, go for it, right? It's something worth it, and that gives you the confidence in yourself, because if you really want to accomplish that something, you have the spring, the resource within yourself to tell you can do it, right? Even if you're gonna fail, that if you had let it go, you will regret it for the rest of your life. And instead, you can do it, and when you will have do it, even if you have failed, you'll say, you know what, this has taught me something in life, next time I will do better. And this is for most things in life, that it's worth taking the risk, right? And otherwise we would never grow. We know that all our growing content passes through the idea that you have to be exposed to pain, to suffering, to risk, right? People who want to shelter too much themselves do not grow, remain children, because they do not experience what is out there. And it's a real issue, because we all tend to feel hurt and wounded, and we like to withdraw when we are acquainted with something that apparently we can't cope with. But life is meant for you at this point, because we will all die at some point. So what's the point of letting it go, right? Life is so short and fragile, you don't even imagine, so why don't you do that, right? You will have been a better person, you will be more proud of yourself for having taken that risk at the end of your life. And that won't eliminate the tragedy, won't eliminate the hurt, the hurting, all the things we could have done better, right? And there is a trunk of these bitter feelings that we bring with ourselves. But that's exactly the motivation, that it's the wisdom, the experience of what we have done, that tells us that we can still, the more if we have enough resources, we can still make it. And these resources are virtually infinite. There is nothing that humans can't do if they really believe in it truly, right? That they can't make them better, at least. In absolute practical terms, if they really believe in themselves, that what they're doing is righteous and they can achieve something good for themselves and the others, right? That tragically depends on this unpredictable series of circumstances. You may be dramatically wrong in doing it, but still, it's better to try than not knowing, right? And nobody tries something risky or bad if it doesn't have, let's say, good reasons. There are people who, of course, have mental problems that can do horrible things because of that. That happens even in the military, technically. Some perfect soldiers sometimes are actually people who are, not average minded, and not necessarily for the positive sense, but altogether, on average, right? You won't risk something unless it's worth it, right? Our mind works like this. We are able to recognize the potential of that, but we often also underestimate how much we can personally do. So, believing in yourself. This is an advice that I can give you wholeheartedly, because until you don't have that reason, you really overlook that. You really don't want to acknowledge. You really say, okay, well, but after all, I'm not so capable, I won't make it. It's better if I don't try what makes me do it. Then you do it and say, you know what, I was wrong. And I wish I had known it before. You wouldn't like to have too much of that left like in that way. In other words, is defeat preferable to success? Well, not really. It's really not. You shouldn't never misunderstand this. The problem that, of course, if you're going for it, you're going for taking it. So even there is a defeatistic mindset that is to say, okay, I will do it romantically for some weird, hopeless reason. That is not a good way of thinking. Von Clausewitz doesn't think highly of that. It's actually a rhetoric of the lost cause that many people that do not really study military history attentively like to attribute to certain causes. Right, it was a lost cause. That war, they started it, but they were doomed to lose. Well, no. Wars normally are started because there is a consistent chance of actually winning them. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. Like, it's something very, very homogeneous throughout all history. And that also reveals you how sometimes the strategical culture that derives from this, from actually knowing reality as it is, demonstrates you. You see, when I was saying before, you may not be interested in the military sense of it broadly meant, is exactly here that I wanted to get. I mean, to the realization that the ways you're going to effectively enact this, because in all this picture, it's not just, I believe myself, I go for it, and I have the courage of it. As we've seen, that will just make you crash against the first obstacle that you hadn't foreseen. You have to plan this. You have to plan this very carefully, rationally, scientifically. Without that, you go nowhere, right? So von Clausewitz is influenced by idealism, but he doesn't stop thinking, even for a single instant, that reality doesn't matter, that physicality doesn't matter. That is central. But at the same time, he realizes that that is passive, while the intellect is active, the spirit is active, and that is the constructive, positive part that can get the thing done. So obviously, you have to plan your actions carefully. You have to think straight in a consistent manner, so that you can't be, you are literally competent, entitled, capable of achieving that result. And then trying it, of course. That's why it's so challenging at the same time, because given that reality is unpredictable in the way we have seen, you may never know how you will succeed. But at the same time, life doesn't have to be about full accomplishments, right? As we've seen, results are always different from expectations. But at the same time, the expectation is often greater. The expectation is often smaller than what you actually achieve. So that is the point of the situation. That is also why von Clausewitz says we should tend towards the absolute in that sense, preferably, right? Von Clausewitz in there expresses properly the judgment because it is the sap of its own theory, right? It's not that life won't impede us to do certain things, but if we had to prefer, like, from which side to be, whether the more passive or the more active one, should be the more active one. Doesn't matter how much it costs, or better, in practice it matters, but preferably speaking, you should always be mentally oriented towards the idea that you should be do something about it, because it's like assuming the initiative in war. We know how fundamental that is, and leaving the initiative to the enemy is terrifying. And this doesn't mean that necessarily the enemy will have it easier than you, but taking the initiative is fundamentally you dictating a part of what is going on, right? And the acknowledgement that, of course, we can't make this thing all by ourselves, and that there is a space for wondering whether what we could do would have been, what we did could have been done better, similar things, is, however, coupled with of course, with the sense of that pain that evidently we are reflecting on, and the suffering of saying, if I had done better, but it's in that moment that you realize that you got that information, that you may have lost something forever, but that chances are that in your life things can find something else that won't necessarily be better, but you still don't know, right? You're still learning, you're still in the process, you may never know, right? Hope here has a fundamental value, right? That's the problem of believing in yourself, is fueling your hopes that do not, even here, strategically speaking, they don't have to be fueled on the base of inconsistent evidence. They have to be fueled on the base of what you can think you can realistically achieve and how close you can get there. So that's also the value of victory that we were explaining before. That is, victory or defeat, as explained actually in those videos we made recently on the meaning of victory, are subjective. That is to say, victory or defeat in war are objectively subjective. That is, there is an outcome that cannot be denied, but this outcome, first of all, it's unique in its kind, and secondly, it has a different value for those who achieve it. That is to say, a victory at some point may make you obtain something that maybe was not worth it. I mean, your objective was obtaining something, but maybe you lost too much. Also, that outcome in this sense might have, given something changes in your life. You look back at that outcome and say, okay, well, yes, I failed there because at the end of the day I had too much, but hey, now I regained even more than that. So that value attributable to certain life events is definitely relative. It's definitely determined by what is going to happen all around the stuff. It's very fluid. So as humans, we like to be stuck on this linear vision of existence that it's definitely realistic, because if we were to depict our existence, it would be kind of a unshapeable set of probabilities that we can go at every moment in different directions towards, and that that freedom we actually have to make a difference and to accomplish something that we often overlook. So when we come across a failure of any kind, the best thing you can do is to acknowledge that there is still room for something else. That thing, it doesn't matter how polarized we are on it, it will bring you something that you will able to associate to others, that will able to blend the thing, to change it, to dilute it, and to eventually even maybe have, you will see this maybe has been better. I mean, how many negative events at the end of the day bring you to a better place than before, right? This happens to many people. Sometimes we're not even aware of that, but if we really reflect it, all the things that were negative in our lives, and all the things that came afterwards of positive, well, might have still been reduced, but in positiveness too. I mean, we could have got much better, right? But at the same time, who could tell that, right? Is why What is that will make the difference in that? The only thing that will make the difference in that is what you personally do. And not by inspiration, but literally by action. That is literally by, getting out there, doing something, interacting with people, and having a capacity to improve yourself. That will come gradually the more you put yourself under that pressure. Another note I would like to conclude with is about the humility of recognizing our own limits. That is possibly the hardest thing we can do, right? There is definitely, as we've seen, life is dramatically limited after all. And all this freedom here we envisaged appears under a different perspective, like, we are doomed, we're doing all this basically for nothing. This doesn't sound like a good mindset. It's just your mindset searching for the worst, pessimistic take on reality and not seeing the intrinsic potential that exists within it, and therefore would mean we have misunderstood the whole content of this video. But it's hard to realize our own limits, because in the moment we do, in a sense, we have already surpassed it, but we have also acquired, yes, the sense that we maybe won't be able to achieve something in our lives. I don't know. The other day I was reasoning, for example, on, how many places I would like to see in my life again. And, I'm still very young, but the question is, aside from anything wrong that can happen at any time, but the question is, will I actually be able to see them all again? I travel a bit, and I must tell you that no, probably I won't. Like, I won't stand in the same place again. There are many places I won't stand in the same place again, and that place still had a meaning for me. It's become a part of my life, and has, and maybe there are others who are still waiting for me that wait my life. And so limits in life are not just are not a matter of increasing our own frustration or saying I'm good for nothing for it, but it's literally about realizing that for that limit we still have others we haven't tested. It sounds dramatically optimistic to some. That is to say, when people get through some of the hardest pains you can ever possibly imagine, say, what is there that will ever compensate me for this? There won't be. The idea of reward, the idea of waiting for something to make things change automatically, it's not a good one either. I think that there is a misunderstanding that we have developed in a bit of a contractualistic sense with the with the universe, as if the karma had to come back at some point. I don't believe in that. If I believed that, I don't know, all people who make bad things at some point are punished, I wouldn't have a moral. All right, I wouldn't believe that I have to do something to make things go better, because after all, everything comes back. No, it doesn't work like that. That's a simplistic view of life. And it's even worse because for you, though, because other people, you're not going to actually control a big deal about that. Even if you punish them, even if you condemn them to death legally, or that's not how it's going to happen, right? The idea that there is someone to blame for what happens to us is true when, of course, somebody actually makes a damage to us and doesn't repay us. This is, I think, a fair way of, it's a fair request. Like, that's how our legal systems works, and that's why we enacted them. But that will never be fully true. Like, justice truly does not belong to this world. So that's another bitter realization. But it also teaches you not to hope that things are going to change by themselves. That is to say, I suffered a lot, so I expected, I deserve something in turn. It's not a good strategy. Literally, from a military point of view, things are not going to change by themselves, because there is something aggressive, even in way other people compete with each other, etc., that will not leave you that space. So learning how to fight and how to be resilient in that sense, and to know even to strike blows or to parry ones, or even more important, to go down, but being able to stand once again back on your feet, is crucial for a developed individual. Right? As a developed individual, if you suffered, if you actually went through hardships, you're actually stronger. It's not just Nietzsche, echoing in this phrase. It that also said a consistent amount of garbage for as far as I'm concerned, but it is also very beautiful things at the same time. And that's also why you don't have to necessarily fixate on formulas that do not, that are broader philosophical takes without an actual scientific evidence, or without, there can be a moral boosting, a spiritual boosting through some ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work all the time, and that's exactly the point. We live in a non-deterministic reality, at least as far as we are concerned. We can't even be possibilist about free will or, determinism. But the question is, it seems, just like in science, that, of course we know absolutely nothing of the reality we live. I mean, what is this whole thing, right? There is nothing, nothing we know. Science doesn't exist, right? It's just a way we approximately arrive to realization that certain things work in a certain way, and kind of fixing them, fixing the rules and testing further, and that works, right? And that's exactly the point. But still, we don't know anything about this, and it is exactly this realization that makes you instead to accomplish the most brilliant scientific results, because it brings you out there to test what this thing really is about. And as far as we are concerned, as far as what is needed to us, that's what we should do, right? It doesn't matter if we fail. It doesn't matter if this all seems so gloomy and dark. No, there is enough space to have fun and to actually be satisfied and to live a good life for ourselves and other people, right, by experiencing it. And that confidence that is needed to do it only comes from the acknowledgement that reality is as complex, as difficult to understand, but that surely has so much still to discover, to use, that it can be relevant just for us, that it's a pity to let it go. It's a pity to give it up, to say that it doesn't matter, too broken. We have a duty, that is to live through this world at the end of the day, is to have this blessing of life that can be hard for many people, but that altogether does work. It imperfectly, but it does, right? We are able to accomplish something here, and we don't know what it is. That's why we define what it's going to be about. We define what we can be simply by acting, and not by withdrawing, giving up, right? So never quit. This is a great advice I can tell. That there is an heroic undertone in this, that is to say, never quit can be dangerous sometimes, yes, but the question is, why would you do anything therefore at that point? Of course, you have to calibrate it according to your own possibilities, but also, if you don't go for it, what are you living for at the end of the day, right? I presume that this is something you can really draw from the Filmkriege in a way that really humbles you, because it makes you realize how how fragile this thing is, but how much we can still accomplish for ourselves. And that really makes you see in perspective how worthy it is, because everything can finish in an instant, but what you will have done will have made a difference, and not just for you, but also for the people you care about. For others, maybe you don't give a damn, but that will be affected by you. So in that sense, you have much to think of, and a lot of responsibility that boosts that confidence, that belief in yourself. There is an empowering sense deriving from this realization, and that's where you should be looking for. I don't know whether I'm talking about the Filmkriege anymore, thinking the things I go through, because I tell you, it's really harder than it seems. It is, but it's also way simpler than it seems, right? That asking too much is at some point useless. Von Clausewitz says at some point you won't have the time to ask too much. So do the best with what you can practically work. Don't lose yourself too much into abstract principles. Look at what happens in reality and try to observe it and to think about that, because that's what we have at the end of the day. And that's why we study history, and that's why military history presents you with the highest degree of that compelled, forced necessity, right, to respond immediately with something that, however, has to work, because otherwise you're out, you're knocked out, it's game over, right? That is what stimulates intelligence, it stimulates what determination, because it shows you what you can do, what you can't do, right? And I want to conclude by just thanking you for the opportunity of, for all the subscriptions you give me, because you wouldn't believe it, but having this, I realized recently, to me, I don't know how I will go on with or not. I mean, there are things in life that really hurt that much, right? And that I have have to cope with as anybody, right? But the fact that I have you getting this information, getting this feed and showing it, and maybe making a something out of it. Well, I think it can be. It's something that makes me happy. I've achieved, right? Something that I'm happy of doing, and I think it's not wasted time. I'm not just talking here, wandering without any possibility of calculating whether this thing will be, by whom is gonna ever listen to this. But it makes me exactly having that faith, that belief, and that sense of of confidence that I wouldn't have if I just had said, okay, well, I will not do it, I will not stay silent, will keep doing my stuff, and I will not try this thing that maybe can make a difference out there. This makes me feel better. This makes me genuinely being capable of coping more, right? It doesn't make me suffer. It doesn't hurt me less when there's something negative happening. But it gives me so much more to cope with that, so much more resources to put out that fire, to go on with that, and to become stronger than you wouldn't imagine. And I must tell you that if I hadn't, I'm telling you this specifically as my subscribers, followers in general, because if I hadn't been reading and commenting the Filmkrieger here, and I hadn't had the idea of Schwerpunkt and the will of doing it, I would be a much less person than who I am, right? And this helped me a great deal, and you have no idea sometimes really how the difference that it makes, not for me in general, abstract, but literally with problems I have, right? We all have. Fortunately, I don't have great problems in my life, must tell you, but some are not easy. There is always something, in fact, as we were saying, that we can do better, especially when you care about someone so much. And this gives me that strength. And I hope I don't bore you with this stuff, because I know it may be boring to listen. It may be like, he normally talks about history. Why he's talking about this now? Well, exactly because history told me this as well. Without that enormous complication, the idea that history is not just a fixed amount of information, but it's simply that enormous set of possibilities that you can find, that is something that makes you really grow. And that's why history is so incisive in a person's existence, and encompasses everything. It doesn't encompass just history or war like in here. It can be everything. It can be literature, it can be feelings, it can be sport, it can be all, right? So never stop believing in yourself, and take that step, because you can't be amazed by yourself in a way you may have never thought of, right? And that you deserve to instead. Alright, so for now we stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.